Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending today's webinar on commercial energy code submittals. It's a nice way to spend this snowy Wednesday with us. This webinar is being recorded, and within about a week's time, it'll get posted to the Code Adoption Toolkit, which I'll post in the chat shortly. If there are any issues with audio, feel free to write me in the chat. And my name is Erica DeLello. I'm a project manager for Noresco. And this series is sponsored by Xcel Energy and the Colorado Energy Office, with training materials created by Shums Coda Associates. So Hope and I have been working with the Colorado Energy Office to provide trainings just like this one. We've also got Xcel's webinars up here on the list. And I'll post in the chat the registration links for all the upcoming trainings. But if you don't see a training that you're looking for here, definitely check out that Code Adoption Toolkit, or feel free to reach out to me and request a group training. We have the option to customize trainings for jurisdictions or companies. And then we also offer tailored technical assistance for jurisdictions. I know there's a lot of jurisdictions thinking about updating I-codes currently, and Hope, a bunch of the other subject matter experts have been working with jurisdictions to get them up to the 2021s or the 2018s by that July 1st deadline. So most of you probably know about that Code Adoption Toolkit that I so often reference, but there's a bunch of resources on there available today. But today I want to highlight our latest resource, which is that helpline, the code helpline. And this helpline is available to anyone in Colorado on any of the I-codes or REACH codes. So for example, if you're a jurisdiction and need assistance on a plan review, or a homeowner or engineer with a question about code applicability, you can submit a question and a subject matter expert will get back to you in just a couple days' time. So you can access this helpline through the Code Adoption Toolkit, and I'll send a link also in the chat shortly. Throughout the webinar, we of course want to encourage questions, so please use that Q&A function, but we will hold questions until the end of the presentation. So just as a heads up, if you're waiting on an answer, so Hope can get through all the content before we address any questions. There's also going to be some polls today, which actually I'll be launching the first one now to get a feel for who is in the room today with us. So go ahead and answer that. And lastly, there will be a survey window that will pop up following the webinar. So just please take a moment to provide us feedback so we can continue to improve on these webinars, come up with other webinars that are topics that you guys want to hear. So with all that said, today's presenter is Hope Medina, and Hope is an energy and sustainability consultant for Shums Coda Associates. She's worked on a national level to develop, promote, and assist with adopting energy and green codes, as well as a local level. She's a governing member of the ICC Sustainability Membership Council, a consensus committee member, and a task group chair for the National Green Building Standard. And she has been for several cycles. So we're in good hands here. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, Hope, and let you pick up your presentation. And looks like we've got a good amount of people responding to that poll. If you're just joining us, make sure to fill that out. I'm going to give it another 10 seconds or so and let Hope take it from here.
All right, I believe I am sharing now, correct?
Looks good. All right.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. So looks like we have, as Erica said, a really good mix in here today. So as always, feel free to send in your questions, submit them so that we can get them answered at the end of the class. But we've got a lot to go over, and as our residential counterpart of this showed us, that there are a lot of questions out there, and it's fantastic to ask the questions. So today we're going to talk about the commercial side of things, as far as what type of documentation, what type of information is required to either be provided to you in a form of maybe a report, or what should be provided to you because you need that information and placed on the plans. Now, when we talk about commercial, we know that it's not always as black and white in the sense that everything is placed on the plans like we would typically find residential. Sometimes we have to do that searching and that hunt and pecking because things get placed into other options like the specifications manual. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. There is a time and a place for that spec manual, but it's not always the best tool to utilize. Remember, we want to use the best tool to convey the information that we need. So with that being said, I will get advancing. One of the items that the energy code really provides for you, and this has been in the code for cycles before the 09, the whole 9 yards, is this section. It's C103.2, and what it states is the following information must be placed on the construction documents, and then it goes on further to say, and details must be provided. Now, obviously, there's a more wording in that, but that's the gist of what it's saying, which is not uncommon, because if we go into chapter 1 of all of our I-codes, it has a section that says this information must be provided on the construction documents, right? We know that braced wall lines have to be placed on the documents, and design parameters. All these items are required to be placed on the code, and the energy code is no different. I think where the energy code is slightly different is the information, and this list that's provided to you really is, it's a great laundry list. It's a great checking off. Do I have this? Perfect. Do I have this? Perfect. I think it really walks you through there. Now, the first thing that we need to know, and it finally got placed into this list for the 2021, is knowing your energy compliance path. So the reason why we want to know what the energy compliance path is, one, we know what type of documentation we need, right? The other item is there are times that certain items might have an option if utilizing this particular path, but if you're not using this path, this option is not available to you. So knowing exactly what that compliance path is going to be important for all of those. And I know not everybody is on the 21. Some are working towards, moving to the 18 or what have you. My suggestion is to have that as a policy or implement that as a amendment to it, because it is very useful all the way around. Now, when we come to the requirement for the prescriptive or for the compliance paths, you really have those 3 options, right? We've got the prescriptive compliance path, the total building performance, and then ASHRAE 90.1. So if we go into C401.2.1, it tells us you have to comply with one of these 3. And then it goes further to say, if you happen to go prescriptive, you have to meet these particular requirements. And if you happen to be a dwelling unit or contain sleeping units within a group R2, then you have a few other options that could be at your disposal. This is where, remember I said, depending on what path you have, you may have options. Here's one of the options right off the bat. The other compliance paths that are out there is your total building performance, which is the performance path, and then utilizing ASHRAE 90.1. Now, when we talk about this particular webinar today, we are looking at it from the IECC, and this is not providing you the information or the requirements of the type of documentation and information that must be placed on the plans through ASHRAE 90.1. While there are a lot of similarities, there are differences with it too. So today's focus is just what's required when it comes to the IECC, just to make that clear, but you do still have the options of complying with 90.1. So when we talk about the specific documentation that's required per the compliance path, if you go prescriptive, remember prescriptive is not just one compliance path. You have 3 options within prescriptive that you must, state you're going to do. Are you going to do the insulation component R value method? Probably the one that we all think of. And if that's the case, there's no prescriptive or compliance path documentation that's specific to that's required. Everything should be placed on the plans. If you're utilizing the assembly U factor, C factor, or F factor method, again, everything should be placed on the plans, but you will need to provide documentation of your assembly value documentation, and you could either use ASHRAE book fundamentals. You could use 90.1 appendix A to demonstrate this is how you got to those numbers. And then if you go with the component performance alternative, at that point you would provide a ComCheck report. A ComCheck report for the thermal envelope is only required with this 3rd option. And then if you are happen to be utilizing the total building performance, then you're going to provide a compliance report that's going to be submitted at the permit submittal. And that information has very specific requirements within that document, that report itself. So you'd have to go into C407 to get all the items that are required with that. Now, if we were to look back here real quick for the prescriptive path, it has that you must comply with C402 through C406 and C408. Now, I highlighted C406 in here because C406 is your additional efficiency package option. If you happen to be on the 2018 or the 2015, that particular edition of the code just says you need to provide and pick one of these options, and whatever option you utilize at that point, then you need to make sure to provide that information on the plans. Typically, a real easy way of demonstrating it is to utilize the mechanical ComCheck, or compliance certificate, the interior lighting compliance certificate. All of those have a little spot on there that you have to pick which additional efficiency package you're going to utilize. And then you would, at that point, have to demonstrate compliance with it through the ComCheck software. But then that also has to be placed on the plans and made readily available, so that whether you're the plans examiner, the contractor, or the inspector going out into the field, you know exactly what you should be looking for. So still looking at the 2018 or earlier edition, you have these 8 options. You can have higher efficient HVAC equipment. Remember, not all HVAC equipment is going to meet that requirement, so that's not an always guaranteed option. Your reduced lighting power density is probably the most utilized one. Enhanced digital lighting controls, on-site renewable energy, dedicated outdoor air system, reduced energy use and service water heating. That is not one that can be utilized across the board. You have to fit into certain parameters, whether that is an option for you. Your enhanced envelope performance and reduced air infiltration. So one of these you're going to pick to utilize. And again, I'd say probably the most often utilized one is that reduced lighting power for anything from 18 and previous editions. Now, where this is going to change and really documenting what exactly you're going to utilize is when you are under the 2021 IECC. Now, there are more options available. It's not just those 8. I believe you have 12 options now and some sub options within those options. But now you are going to be required to obtain 10 points. So, or 5 points if you're a tenant space going in there. And so because of that, it's really going to require a lot of planning and a lot of documentation of what your intent is, because you can't miss these down the road as the inspector goes out and says, hey, you have in here, you're going to utilize reduced lighting power density and you're over your wattage, here. So it's something you're going to want to make very, very clear, because you will not be, more than likely, you will not be only utilizing one option. You're going to have to do multiple options. Like if we were to look at a 5B, we have no options. That's a single option if we're a group, a B occupancy. If we go to 6B, you may have the opportunity that you could go with an enhanced envelope performance. Not impossible, but it is going to be very difficult considering the movement of the thermal envelope, the values of what the thermal envelope is. Not impossible, like I said, but it is going to take some real forethought on it, at the very beginning, and making sure that whatever is decided between the architect, designer, engineers, and the building owner is translated down the road. Now you say, Hope, how can we do this in a fashion that's going to be so easily and readily understood what we're going to do? I'm so glad you asked that question, because a great tool that's at your dispense that doesn't get utilized in a fashion as it should be for the energy code is your code analysis. Put in there what energy compliance path you're going to utilize, and then list what additional efficiency packages you're going to use. This one document, it is, really supposed to say all this information. So start utilizing it to your best advantage and place that information in there. Now, of course, you don't have to place it on here. You could have it in a different location, but it's a tool that all plans examiners look at. And so this would make it very easily acknowledgeable for everyone. So the next thing that we have to think about is that thermal envelope depiction. Now, when we talk about commercial, it's typically not what we would see on this left-hand side, right? Where it's very simple and easy, and we're able to determine that we've got a continuous thermal envelope. Typically what we see is what is on, the middle and right-hand side of the screen, where we're having to play those puzzle pieces. This goes up and this goes over. So I think we're going to be continuous, because when you start mounting them all together and put them all together and put that mental picture in there, I think it's going to work. But it may ultimately come down to, you got to pay attention to it out in the field, whether you're the contractor or the inspector, making sure that that thermal envelope is continuous. Now, here's a very well-known restaurant chain that did do it as one area that, we could go in and figure out, okay, here we go, we're climbing, we're here, it comes up, comes over. It's very easy to determine where the thermal envelope is in this depiction. This is not always an option on commercial projects, as it may have been on the more residential side of things. So there is a puzzle piece component of it. Just make sure you provide that puzzle piece, and keep in mind that there are some areas that we want to know whether they're inside that thermal envelope or outside the thermal envelope, such as the mechanical rooms, such as if you have attic space or what have you, crawl spaces. Make it very clear. So insulation, well, you know what, before I move any further, would you mind, Erica, pulling up the compliance path question? So my question for all of you is, have you either as a designer placed the energy compliance path on the plans, or as a plans examiner seen it on the plans, or as a contractor inspector seen it on the plans, as far as which energy compliance path this project was designed to? And I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to hit yes or no. All right. We could probably close that down. What do we got? Yes. I am very, very happy to see that many yeses. I'll be quite honest, is this the ComCheck? ComCheck is a report that's utilized for this particular compliance path, for a compliance path. But they should on the plans list that they're doing with the component alternative performance option on the plans. My favorite is when they say, I'm going to go with res check or something, but then they cut and paste the table out of the book and place it on the plans. That's always difficult because which one is it? Because these values don't meet what's shown in here. And I bet that the person who did the mechanical calculations did not utilize what was in the book, but utilize the information was given to them. So let's talk about these insulation values. So insulation R values are so incredibly important, and it does not matter which compliance path you have utilized. You can go with the U factor option. You still have to place on the plans what the R value for that insulation is. And that's so that down the road, me as a plans examiner, I can look at it and say, okay, this assembly will work. And then me as the contractor, I can say, oh, I need to install an R19. I don't care what the overall U factor assembly is. What insulation do I put in that wall, right? And then the inspector knows what they should be looking for when they go out in the field. But as you can see on the screen, insulation is not really one size fits all that you can be interchanging as it goes. You got fiberglass batt insulation that goes anywhere from an R3 per inch to an R3.8, probably more of a 3.2, 3.4, honestly. As far as that goes, you got polyiso that's typically 6.2 to 7.2. I'll tell you, out of all my years for asking for that value, typically it's an R5 that I get. Very rarely is it anything above an R5, but I do ask for them to provide it for me because I can't just go with that it's going to be an R6.2. So that information of knowing what type of insulation it is, because it's required to tell me what insulating material is going to be utilized and what that R value is. And that is very specific to be placed on those plans. Now, if we were to look at what we see on the screen here, can you tell by the information that is placed right here as far as what our R value is for the detail on the left-hand side? No, it just tells us that we have 3 layers that are 2 inches thick. And good thing is they do say to stagger overlaps. Perfect. That's to code. But it doesn't tell me how much it is, other than I know it's 2 inches. I know that this is required to be an R30, so it's probably an R5, but I can't assume that. So that is one of the things that I would want to know. And then if we look at this right-hand side, there's a few things on here that, I was concerned with. Originally, I had this note up here that said that the roof membrane on 5 inches of rigid insulation. It's probably polyiso, but when you say rigid insulation, right, there's a couple of rigid insulation. It could be the expanded polystyrene insulation, that styrofoam little ball insulation, or it could be the extruded polystyrene, which is that Play-Doh factory rigid insulation, or is it polyiso? As you can see, you can go anywhere from a 3.4 as your R value per inch all the way up to the 7.2. So just saying rigid insulation isn't necessarily going to work. But the one thing that they did come back with their response is they created this table on here. And the table does say, okay, so that's going to be an R25 continuous. Now, it did not say what it's going to be, but it does tell me right below it, polyiso for their walls. So my guess is it's probably going to be polyiso, and they might have put something in their response of something to, direct that. But it is something to be aware of. This can be extremely important in knowing exactly what is listed on these plans. Next thing is your fenestration. We have to know what fenestration it is, what's your U factor, what's your solar heat gain coefficient, because all of that is vital when it comes to, when it comes to making sure that we have really good compliance, because we know that one of the biggest areas that's going to have a large effect on your heating and cooling loads is your ceiling, your roof design, and glazing, your vertical fenestration. So this information is extremely important. Now, this is where, if you look at a window schedule, typically, the window schedule will talk an awful lot. It'll give you the type of framing, whether it's, a fire rated construction, whatever the case may be. The information as far as what the window U factor and solar heat gain coefficient is typically not listed in there. It should be, because you're listing all that other information. So that information should be placed on the plan somewhere. Where do we usually find it? Anyone have any thoughts where you might be finding this? Typically, where I find any information on that is in the spec book. And for my architects and designers and engineers on the call here, it's one of the most hidden areas. It would be great if it was placed in notes or in that table, because I've heard, well, I don't want it to be misconstrued or whatever, but you put the information in the spec manual. You say your overall U value glazing, including the glazing, is a 0.36. You could put that wording in that table, because that table right here has a lot of information. You could say up here, overall U value, including glazing, and then list it. That would make it very, it would make it easier for everyone down the road for them to get and build what you designed. The other thing is, at plan review, what we should be getting is an NFRC certificate. And that NFRC certificate tells you, gives you basically that U factor, the solar heat gain coefficient, the visible transmittance requirements of the glazing. Now, I say that, but here's the caveat to it. The reality is, you aren't going to get that NFRC certificate until you actually buy the windows. The windows are not going to get bought until the plans get approved, where they know that their design is going to work. So how do we get, not around, but work together? And how we work together is, for plan review, what we want is a compliance certificate. And typically you can get something like that from the framing manufacturer. It'll have that information on there for you, saying, hey, if you're going to have this type of glass, the center of glass with this, you're going to get this overall U factor. It's a great tool to have. So even if you don't have the specific information on the plans in that sense, having this documentation is required and needed, and it can suffice with that. So, one of the things that you could do is, have that additional column in here that says, to provide this when you have your window and doors, that says, here's the U factor, here's the solar heat gain coefficient as it was designed. I've had where wonderfully you got a note down here that says U factor 0.32, solar heat gain facts 0.32, and then the specifics can be found in that NFRC certificate. That's a great program and a great way of making everything work with that. So the big one right now that is probably going to be the most impactful in my opinion right now is how we deal with our air leakage requirements, our air barrier requirements. Now, in the in the list, it does tell us down here that now you must have an air barrier, air sealing details, including the location of the air barrier. Now this, while it is highlighted as blue, showing that it's new language in the 2021, it is revised to be more specific in the 2021. But if you looked at the 18, the 15, the 12, it's still listed in there. It still states that you have to have air sealing details and their location. So this isn't exactly new, but it is extremely important. And the reason for that is, yes, in the earlier editions, you have options. You either declare you're going to go prescriptive, which means you comply with section X through Z type deal, or you can do testing and you can do the blower door testing, get a CFM of 0.04 or less per 100 square feet of conditioned area. And then it has a list of items that you must comply with. In the 2021, the options has really changed. You will be doing blower door testing, basically, unless you can fall under these very, very small exceptions of not having to test. But basically here in Colorado, for the most part, most of the exceptions will not apply to us typically. So basically we're looking at our buildings are going to need to be tested. Well, how do we test and be demonstrate compliance with it? We're going to have to be a lot more mindful with it, which means instead of placing information in the spec book, we're going to have more stuff placed on the plans, because a lot of times it'll say in the spec book, you can have one of these 3 options, or, do this or that or what have you. But because there will be actual testing that's going to happen, I think, to get everybody to the point of where we are just automatically passing the test because we're paying attention. Because I can tell you, when I go out and I look and I see what's being built, the air barrier component on the commercial side is not paid attention to as much as it is on the residential side. So for the 2021, it's going to be extremely important to list on the plans what you're going to utilize. Are you utilizing materials, or are you utilizing the assemblies? And in some instances, you're utilizing both, right? There may be portions of the building that you're going to use the material section, and there may be portions of the building that you're going to utilize the assembly option with. You're going to need to, make notes about sealing joints and seams and how you're going to deal with penetrations, what the penetrations are going to be sealed, because they're going to probably have different things. How do you deal with recessed lighting? And if you happen to have concealed fire sprinklers that are located within that thermal envelope, you're going to have to be reaching out to those manufacturers and making sure that you get because the manufacturers are supposed to be providing all of us with their recommendations and how they want their systems to be air sealed for this. And so that's something that we need to make sure that we start asking for. So the next thing that we really need to make sure that we're getting is dealing with these mechanical system designs. Now that has to deal with getting the load calculations, which is very similar on the residential side. You have that requirement to get a manual JDNS. This is the commercial version of a manual JDNS. It doesn't utilize ACA. It utilizes different parameters and different procedures, but it is still required. And it happens to be required not only out of the energy code, it's also a requirement out of the mechanical code. If you go into 312 of the IMC, that section states you are required to provide heating and cooling load calculations. So this is a requirement we need to know. It's useful and needed for the commercial component of it, because this is what we go after when we're trying to determine if the mechanical equipment has been sized properly, and also making sure that what's getting out there will meet those particular needs if there was some sort of substitution. So this is an example of some of the design parameters and an example of load calculations that have been performed, and then how we get them, and we look at, you know, our cooling loads and our heating loads and determine whether the equipment that's there is sized appropriately. So it's extremely important. So as I mentioned, sizing of the equipment is that tangible concept of our return on investment, or where we find that energy efficiency component of it. You know, we can't have really good, you know, small sized equipment or correctly sized equipment if we don't have a very robust thermal envelope. It's, you know, our buildings work as a system. If we don't have a good thermal envelope, our mechanical system isn't going to run, you know, great. It's going to have to be larger than if we had a good thermal envelope. So we all work together, but a great tool that can be utilized no matter which compliance path is utilized for the project is you can go into the ComCheck software, and it allows you, you don't have to fill out anything for the thermal envelope, but it allows you to fill out and do the mechanical components of it. And it provides us with a plethora of information as a plans examiner. And it, in my opinion, it's so helpful down the road because it's a real quick kind of cheat sheet, right, that you're able to use all throughout that project. Now, it's going to be extremely important because in here, that contract is going to let me know, one, what the additional efficiency package is. So I can, if I'm out in the field, I know, oh, okay, so we got to be mindful of these two items, making sure, you know, it's down to the T on that. And that could be if you happen to do the higher efficiency HVAC equipment. The minimum might only be the, if we look down here for the cool or the heating, the required efficiency is 80%. Maybe you were intending to do the 10% better, so you were going to go 88%. And you look and the proposed is 88%, but you go out in the field and the efficiency is only 80%. You know now that you need to be, you know, mindful of what's going on. So this thing can be a plethora of information. It gives you so much. Me as a plans examiner, I know what type of equipment is, you know, going to be utilized, the basic type of equipment. You know, is it a heat pump? Is it this? Okay, I have, you know, a pretty good idea of what's going to be installed. It also gives me the information for the water heating equipment. I also know what the capacity is, what the efficiency is going to be. It gives me the information about the fan system. Is there an air economizer on there? If it's not, which exception are they trying to utilize with it? This document is just wonderful for everyone involved in the project. And then we can go through and verify that we have the correct information within that schedule itself. So it's a great tool. The equipment and the controls. We need to know what type of controls are being utilized. Probably one of the biggest ones, or the easiest one we start thinking about mechanical, is thermostats, right? Because that's an easy one for us to really focus on. It's very visible for us. And so we know that, you know, hey, you're heating a vestibule, we have to have an additional thermostat that's located in the vestibule. And then we have the stuff listed on the plans that tells us, which includes the new heating and cooling set points for it. And then we have our lovely, lovely duct sealing and piping insulation and their locations. Now, this is extremely important because we need to know, make sure that we're getting the correct insulation in the correct locations. Now, I had a great question that came up, and I'm going to pull it up really quick because I have questions about ductwork being located within a plenum itself. Is that ductwork required to be insulated? And it actually comes down to, there's a degree difference as to whether or not this the ductwork is required to be insulated. So knowing all of that information is extremely important, and having it placed on those plans, I know that, okay, well, there's less than that 15-degree difference between what's in the duct and what's outside the duct. So, okay, you don't have to have that plenum insulated. But all of that information, if I don't have that information listed there, I can't say that you meet that. Now, this is probably one of those requirements. It's a table that you find, and you find it in a section that you wouldn't normally think of. We're looking at our piping insulation. You have to go into 403 11.3, I think, for the 18. Now I can't remember, but this information should be provided. Now, I'll tell you that most often I will find this information in a spec book. They'll have like a copy of the table, but I also will tell you a lot of the spec books that I've seen have the wrong table in there. They have an earlier edition of the table than what you would find in the 15, the 18, or the 21, quite honestly. It's a really old table that's listed in there. So even if it is in that spec book, look at that spec book, because it may not be the correct value. Now, I'm not saying that a spec book it isn't a good idea. I think there is absolutely a time and place for a lot of information. And even this could potentially be in the spec book, but put a note on the plans that talks about, you know, the piping insulation needs to be per the table found in spec XYZ. So at least you're giving them directions to go to that spec book so that they have some idea for it. Just helpful tip. I think you can say, hope you're crazy. That's fine. I'm fine with being crazy. So this is probably one of those items that I get a lot of questions about. And how do I demonstrate this? What are some things I can use? Now, this is something that would be determined by typically it's done by whoever's doing your MEPs, typically whoever's doing your plumbing design should be incorporating this. Now, what I'm seeing a lot of on the commercial side is that they're calling out a circulation pump that's going to get utilized. That will meet the requirements of it. Closed loop circ will meet the requirements of this, but we have to have that information placed on the plans themselves. Daylight zones. Why do we care about daylight zones? Anybody have any thoughts? Or Erica, if you wouldn't mind putting up the poll for the daylight zones. So where do you find information for daylighting requirements? I'm asking you, when you open up, if you're a plans examiner and you open the plans, where are you finding the information for the daylighting requirements? If you're an architect, electrical engineer, you know, where are you placing that information? The reason I ask is because there's a lot of things coming down the pike when we talk about daylighting. And then plus this has been a requirement, but it hasn't always been demonstrated on the plans, because sometimes, because it's associated with windows, sometimes you know, there's a question about whether it should be placed on the architectural sheets. Is that an architect responsibility, or is it because it's so also associated with the daylight responsive controls dependent on how much general wattage is getting utilized, which comes up on the electrical sheets, you know, are they placed on the electrical plans? So that's always a question. And then when you ask the question, the architect says that should be placed on the electrical sheets. The electrician says, no, those are deals that should be looked at the residential sheet or the architectural sheets. So I was just curious where others are seeing it. So it looks like biggest winner on it, and that's not by much, is the electrical section sheet. I'll tell you that 9 times out of 10, that's probably where I see them too. But I have seen them where they do show it on the architectural sheets, and they might just be listed as daylight zones, but the actual requirements will come in on the electrical side of things. So if you happen to be on the 18 edition of or earlier, you just have that one single daylighting zone that's required. So as you can see, I love getting plans from this particular entity. They're wonderful. They give me all the information. Here's the blue box telling me, hey, here's our daylight zone. And then they tell me how much wattage is within that daylight zone. So now I know, okay, I can just move on around. These 2 little things make my life so much easier and everybody else's life easier. Now, when we start talking about the 2021, it is slightly different because it's not just a single designated side-lit daylight zone. You have 2 daylight side-light zones that must be demonstrated on the plans, and then they also have to be separately controlled. I'm sorry. So the next one we'll talk about the lighting fixture schedule and the wattage and the control narrative. There should always be a sequence of operation that's typically given. But one of the really good things is the exterior lighting compliance certificates or the interior lighting compliance certificate. It does give us a plethora of information. You know, we can look at it. We know obviously the code edition, what's going on for the exterior lighting. We know what zone it is. It gives us our wattage, all that information that we're looking for. It's right here for it. And again, on the resident or the interior lighting, it still gives us that information that we're really looking for. Now, I want to provide you with a little bit of a help me help you type of situation. So for those that are on the webinar that happen to be architects and designers and engineers, I want to make it so that the code officials that gets your plans say, yes, I got plans from XYZ. They are awesome. They give me the information and it's so easily, readily available that I can find it and move right along. That's always my goal. I have some architects that I get excited about when I get their plans. I'm like, I know that it's not going to be a 12-hour energy review. It's going to be a 1-hour energy review, right? So that's what I hope for everyone. But one of the things that you can do is really start utilizing your code analysis. Place in your code analysis the compliance path that's getting utilized, what energy efficiency package you're going to utilize, and some air barrier information. And when I say air barrier information, you don't have to put in there like seal the joints and seams, seal all penetrations. The information that I would put on there would be, we are going to utilize material, and that material that's going to be utilized is going to be OSB on the exterior. And then for your wall sections, that's where you could place the information as far as, sealing the joints and seams, how you deal with penetrations and so forth. But putting the basic information right there so that in theory, the contractor opens it up and says, oh, all right, the OSB, I'll make sure that I seal that up, because if they don't see it, they don't know if they're supposed to seal it. What are they going to do? They're just going with what they did at the last time. Erica, would you mind putting up the poll for the air leakage requirements? I have a poll that I kind of missed, but we'll catch it right here. So my question for you is, typically, where do you find the information for air leakage requirements? Are you seeing that information placed on the plans only, in the specifications only, a combination of plans and specifications, or are you finding it difficult to find any of that information in some of your commercial projects that are coming? So if you could take a moment, click the button that is most applicable, because I'm sure you've probably had at least one of all 4, but what is the general typical way that you're seeing this? All right, we could probably close that down. What great results do we have? Plans only, specification. I'll be honest, I kind of figured the none provided would be the higher percentage rate. And I'll tell you why. Most of the time, I'll be honest, I can't think of a plan review that I have done in the past. I honestly, I can't recall a commercial project that I have not had to write up. What are you utilizing as your air barrier? What are you utilizing, prescriptive testing? What material are you going to use? Or is it going to be an assembly? The whole 9 yards. And quite often, this one review comment might go back and forth 3 or 4 times, because there's not, sometimes there's not an understanding of exactly what needs to happen. And I think if we had it placed on the plans, very readily available, with support from the spec book, I think that would be a good idea. Thanks, Erica. I appreciate that. The other option is, consider maybe placing all of the energy items on its own sheet. And when I say that, I'm not saying take one sheet, put all your thermal envelope in there, all the R values, all the stuff on there listed as, a ton of notes. Notes aren't actually, useful in everything. There are instances that it's useful, and it actually specifically calls out in section 103.2 that these are to be detailed, not necessarily listed as a note. But you could have your energy architect sheets that gives us very specific parameters. Here's what we want: the maximum U factor for our windows, our solar heat gain is going to be this, and then our walls are going to be an R10, well, hopefully not an R10, but something like that. And then you have a separate sheet that deals with your mechanical energy components, and then a separate sheet that deals with your lighting components. Not that you have to do your interior lighting where we go and count, you list 15 fixtures of this and then you go count those, but there are other items that could potentially be done. So you could utilize the energy items on its own. Use ComCheck. ComCheck is very underly utilized, and when I say that is because if you look at the bottom here, when you fill out a ComCheck, especially on the thermal envelope side, it says, requirement will be met, requirement not applicable. You actually have to physically go in and push that it's not applicable. Why not go jump down here and say, hey, we have this information. If it's required and you have it and it's in F1, put F1. You direct me exactly where to go. And what that does is really helps me, because let's face it, if I know where I'm going to, A4 point or -10 to get the information about the above grade walls. That's where I'm going to go. Instead of hunting and pecking through 14 pages. And when I hunt and peck through those 14 pages, what else am I going to find and write up? Right? Not that I'm saying to get out of things, but sometimes because I'm looking and hunting and pecking, all of a sudden it spurs other questions that I have to ask. Well, what do you mean by this? Are you trying to do this? Make it very cut and dry. The other thing is use an index, something similar to this. So here we have this, it's telling us it's on sheet, whatever. Great. So you don't necessarily have to have your own sheets, but if you have your above wall, information on sheet 410, then I go to 410, anything that's going to help. Now, one of the things that I want to let you know is we do have help for you. Whether you're on the 18 or the 2021, we have created a submittal checklist for the energy components that are required to be submitted. And it's broken down into which compliance path you're utilizing, because obviously the performance path is going to have different requirements than if you were going with the R value based method. So we have those particular documents. We also have these documents for 90.1 for the 2016 edition and the 2019 edition. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to send those along to you. And then, of course, as Erica said, we do have the Codes Helpline, great tool. You might want to consider that. Erica, would you mind putting the last poll up on the screen real quick? So my question for you is, how many of you are planning on adopting newer codes? And are you thinking about adopting and having it in effect before June 30th of this year, or you're looking to maybe adopt after or on or after July 1st, or you have no idea what the plan is? All right. Well, let's see. I think it's a pretty good mix here. Pretty even there. Looks like on or before June 30th is the front runner, and I don't know is next. So, oh, that kind of sounded like that comedy routine. Survey's going to go out, as Erica mentioned. Now I'm going to let you know, because somebody has brought this to my attention. Don't close out of this very, very quickly, because if you close out too fast, you will not be able the opportunity to fill out the survey, because they apparently have done it on several times and would like to share that bit of information to everyone. So we'll give you that. Here is my contact information, and this is question and answer time.
Great, thanks, Hope. We've got, for those of you, please use that Q&A function and put your questions in that question and answer, and I'll feed them over to Hope. But looks like our first question is if there are any updates on the 2024 IECC.
Yes, here's the updates I can give you. We are currently working on the 2024. I am part of the Commercial Consensus Committee, and then we have Gil Rossmiller, who sits on the Residential Consensus Committee. So we're pretty well in tuned. I really hesitate to give you any sort of information, because we're at the second stage of the process where public comments have been submitted. The subcommittees are reviewing them and going through them, and they're being presented to the full consensus committee to get that kind of final vote. It's not the final vote, but it's the more final vote. So we are in the process. We have a due date, I believe it's sometime in April. So there are a few things coming down the pike, and what I will tell you is it will be more energy efficient, and there are a lot of new concepts that are being introduced and will be utilized, and I can pretty much say will be part of the 2024 IECC.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of administrative questions. First, can you show the slide with the links to the checklist?
Oh, is that? I think that's here.
Yeah, I think it's that one. So that's on Xcel Energy's website, I believe. Is that right, Hope?
The left-hand side is the adoption toolkit for CEO, and the right-hand side is the Xcel Building Code Support Program webpage. But you can reach out to either Erica or myself, and we're happy to send you those links.
Looks like we get another question. The residential webinar is available on the code adoption toolkit with the slides as well. And I guess for my question to you, Hope, is if you can send me these slides in addition, so we can get those uploaded. Great.
Yep, absolutely.
Here we go. For us designers, do you have any templates that are available to help better show the energy code compliance, either prescriptive or contract?
I think, again, I think one of the tools, there isn't one specific item that I think is necessarily, I don't have a template. All I have is if you are utilizing the compliance, the component alternative compliance, the ComCheck option of prescriptive, you have that already built-in tool that's just not getting utilized. So that might be something if you are going with that. If not, my suggestion and is to place some of the information on there within your code analysis sheet. It's just so underly utilized when it comes to energy, but it could have a huge impact in the successfulness of your design. Because remember, not only do we have, all the upcoming requirements, but in the 21, yes, we have the blower door testing, which, is going to be probably a lot of nail biting for a lot of communities because there hasn't been a whole lot of focus on that per se. But another thing is we do have the benchmarking program that's up and coming. And so, you're going to want to make sure that everything is working in the way that it is. And I think utilizing that and code analysis would be very beneficial for you. Does that answer your question? I hope.
We'll give them a minute to reply.
Okay.
But there is another question on continuing education for ICC. And yes, I'll be sending out certificates within the next week or so. So you can self-report those hours. And I believe I need that ICC number from you. I'll just,
Okay.
as a heads up.
All righty. Well, we will get that over to you so everybody can get their good stuff with it. I think as far as for designers and architects, I think it's just to kind of hit on that a little bit is just maybe even reaching out to the building department, because I know there are some building departments that from my understanding are starting to require like an energy index where you have to, where's this located on what sheet and so forth. I think it's a great idea in that aspect. So they may have some suggestions as far as what they're looking for.
Yeah, I'm actually working on the checklist for Denver right now, and they've got plan drawing and reference number so that they know exactly where to look for all your requirements. And for that C406, I'm working on that right now. And I know, just as a heads up, Denver has altered that section quite a bit. So definitely check out the Denver amendments. They're going into effect June or May 1st. So check that out. I know that they've posted the code requirements for 2022 on their website.
Yeah, and speaking of checking on amendments, there's a lot of communities right now that have established, they adopted the 2021 and then they went beyond what was even in the 2021 and have additional requirements that are in there that you're probably going to want to make sure that you're fully aware of, such as, they may require that you actually do the higher efficiency mechanical equipment. So then you have to start thinking, because not all mechanical equipment can actually meet the parameters and the requirements that are listed in there. So it may change your design. Maybe you can't go with that RTU unit that you were thinking. Maybe you have to go with a cooling tower instead. And that changes, your design. So a lot of that information might not be a bad idea to check on.
Definitely. Looks like they're
Is
looking
that
for
this one that you're referring to?
I think so. The 2021 IACC bullet points.
If you're interested in it, reach out to me. I have the actual document that you can utilize. I'm very, very happy to share those, because I figure the more people who have them, the more opportunities there are to get fully complete packages that are submitted. Now, they may not be, no review comments, but if you give them all the information, I can guarantee you those review comments will probably be reduced because they're able to find that information.
Yeah, Hope, if you could actually send those to me too, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right, well, I think that wraps up all of our questions for today. Thank you again, Hope, for a great presentation as always. And thank you for everyone for participating in all the polls and being active on the chat. Much appreciated. We'll see you hopefully at one of our upcoming webinars.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks, Erica.